Hi everyone, welcome back. I hope you're all doing well. Today's case, oh my god, it's gonna make your blood boil. We are heading back to the UK today and we're going to cover a case that was making headlines everywhere when it happened. And it is a very recent case from the UK as well, and it is the case of Louise Porton. And why did Louise make a lot of headlines? Well, she made a load of headlines because she chose her sex life before her children. Yeah, you heard that right. And she had two amazing, wonderful children, 3-year-old Lexi and 17-month-old Scarlett. And Louise just didn't care. She thought that her own life, in particular her own sex life, was more important than being a mother to her children. Louise would just sleep with pretty much anyone that she came in contact with as long as they gave her attention, and her children just got in the way. And because Louise thought that her sex life was so important, the absolute worst would happen to her children. And I have been getting so angry and frustrated researching this case this week. This whole case is completely senseless, and yeah, be prepared to get angry after today's video, so let's dive in. Before we get started, I just want to give a huge thank you to today's sponsor, and that is Misplay. Misplay is a free-to-use loyalty app for all of us that love to play mobile games. Through Misplay, you get to discover new games, play those games, you collect points for playing games through Misplay, and then you exchange those points for gift cards. It sounds too good to be true, doesn't it? But it really is that simple. And Misplay offers a huge catalogue of mobile games across all genres. There's puzzle games, word games, strategy, adventure, merge, sports, and more. Like literally they have everything. And then you can exchange those points for gift cards from some of your favorite stores like Amazon, Walmart, Tesco, Starbucks, Uber, H&M, and more. I mean, as you can see from the app here, if you just scroll through the home screen, you can see how many games there are. And I've just found that this is a great way to discover new games. Like some of these games I'd never heard of, and I would never have discovered them if they weren't on Misplay. And some of the games that I have been playing through the app are Woodoku, a word block puzzle game based on Sudoku. And Woodoku really tests your brain, like it is actually really challenging. And then one of the games that I have been loving the most is called Township, which is just a casual farming and city building game where you get to harvest crops, sell produce, build your dream town, and you guys know I absolutely love games like that. And thanks to Misplay, I was sent some extra points so I can show you just how easy it is to redeem a gift card. And now I can just go into the shop and choose a gift card of my choice, and it really is that simple. You really have nothing to lose by downloading Misplay because you get to discover new games, play new games, and get rewarded for playing those games. And right now the app is only available on Android, which is why I'm using my Android tablet to play the games, but hopefully it will be available on iOS very soon. And if you wanted to try out Misplay for yourself, you can download it completely free by going to misplay.com/Danielle, or just go to the link in my description box. And using that link really does help out this channel because it lets Misplay know that you came from this video. And you will get 200 bonus points by signing up today. And you can use my code Danielle50 in the app to get an extra bonus 50 points that will help you redeem your very first gift card. All the details and everything will be in the description box. Thank you again to Misplay for sponsoring today's video, but thank you to every single one of you watching right now because truly from the bottom of my heart, without all of you guys, I wouldn't get opportunities like this. And now let's jump into today's case. Louise Porton was born at some point in 1996. I couldn't find an exact date of birth, and she grew up in the town of Walsall, which is just outside of Birmingham in the UK, and she lived with her parents and her 2 siblings. Now, growing up, Louise was not an easy child. Pretty much from the get-go, she was a problem to her family because it is reported that her family were a very close-knit family. They would do a lot for one another. They were just really close. Apart from Louise. For example, there would regularly be gatherings at their nan's house and all of the family, all of the cousins, they would get along, but Louise would just stand there in the corner staring at people, giving people dirty looks, never wanting to talk to anybody, looking down on others. It is also said that from a very young age, Louise was very manipulative and cunning. She would always be lying to her parents. She also had the ability to bend people to her will. and she would be constantly trying to get her siblings and her cousins in trouble. But she wasn't just manipulative. It has also been said that from the get-go, she was vicious and violent to her siblings and cousins. Whenever anyone would approach her, she would say things like, "Go away or I'll smash your face in." And she would repeatedly get into fights. And she really didn't like her cousins at all. But to be honest, I don't think there's many people that Louise does like. But it wasn't just her cousins that she was really horrible to. She was also really horrible to her mom and her nan. She was always arguing with her nan and her mom. And then when Louise was approximately 11 years old, she also began stealing money and jewelry from her nan. Yet, the lowest of the low. To steal money from a grandparent especially? How can anyone do that? But anyway, as Louise moved into her teenage years, her relationship with her family did not get better at all. If anything, it actually got worse. Especially the relationship with her mom. So her mom, when Louise was a teenager, had an affair with another man and left the family. Kind of pretty much just ran off, leaving Louise and her two siblings to be raised by their dad. And Louise absolutely despised her mom for this, which I've got to say I don't blame her, because Louise's mom has just had an affair with a random man and ran off with him, essentially choosing this man over her own children. And I do think that maybe this is where Louise learned some of her behaviour from, because Louise tends to pick other men over her children, but obviously I'm getting way too ahead of myself there. I just wanted to point that out now, because this is exactly what Louise's mom is doing to her. And Louise despised her mom so much that Louise's siblings, they still had contact with their mom, would still see her on occasion, talk to her on the phone, etc. But Louise didn't want anything to do with her mom. She just completely was like, no, if you're going to pick that other man over me, I'm not going to talk to you again. So over the next few years, Louise as a teenager is now growing up without her mom, and things just continue to get worse and worse. So Louise is still going over to her nan's house on a regular basis, and her nan is trying to do the best that she can. Her nan has tried to step into that motherly role now that Louise's mom is absent, but Louise is not appreciative of that. She still continues to steal from her nan, manipulate her nan, just be really horrible to her nan. Louise would continue to have disagreements with the rest of the family. Nobody could see eye to eye with Louise. Louise was just always described as being very selfish, very cold, and she started to go off the rails a bit. She stopped paying attention in school. She just hung around the streets causing trouble, and she also got into trouble with the police quite a few times, and she's only 15 years old. And just generally in Louise's life, things were not going great. This is when we would get to her next big problem. A problem that is going to be very significant for the rest of today's case. And that was Louise's apparent sex addiction. And I stress the word apparent because that is what the media have reported. I don't actually know if she did have a sex addiction. I don't know how true this is. I'm just telling you what the media have been reporting on this case. So as Louise reached her older teenage years, it is said that she started to get a lot of attention from other boys and men. And Louise absolutely loved this. She absolutely loved that she had these boys and men, and I don't quite know how old they are, so that's why I'm saying boys and men. She absolutely loved that she had these boys and men chasing after her, wanting to be with her. She loved that they were lusting after her, and Louise realized that if she dangled sex in front of these other boys and men, she would get a lot more attention. And from this point going forward, Louise would just sleep with anyone, and I'm not joking there. She would literally sleep with anyone and everyone. It is said that she would sleep with anyone if they showed her even the tiniest bit of attention. Louise realized that she could offer up sex in exchange for gifts and money. So, for example, she would go around and say to these other boys and men, "Oh, there's this nice bag that I want, and if someone buys it for me, maybe I'll give them a nice reward." And she would hint to everyone that she would come across that if they were nice to to her, showed her attention, gave her money, bought her gifts, she would perform any kind of sexual act that they wanted. And soon enough, there was a lot of people lining up to buy her gifts, give her money, do whatever in exchange for sex. And was this a sex addiction? I don't know. If you want my opinion, I personally think it is more about attention. I think she wants attention from people, have power over people, and maybe Louise feels like the only way she can get attention from others, validation, is through sex. So I don't know if you can actually class this as a sex addiction. Who knows? But you know what the media are like, especially when it comes to women. And this went on for a while until eventually Louise left school. And I feel like I just need to pause right there. I have literally just told you all how many people she's sleeping with every single person that she comes across. And I can guarantee you some of those were adults. And she's only just left school. So anyway, she leaves school and she turns this so-called sex addiction into a full-blown career. And instead of approaching people in person and saying things like, oh, if you buy me this bag, I'll have sex with you, she goes online. She joined a ton of dating apps and websites where she would talk to as many men as she possibly could. She would be really flirtatious with them. She would use a lot of innuendos. I think we can all kind of imagine how these conversations would have gone. And she was just doing the exact same thing online that she was doing in person. She was dangling sex in front of men in exchange for gifts and money. And Louise was posting a lot of photos online trying to entice men. She would do a lot of cosplay. She would dress up in various different costumes. She was like a kinky sailor, like a raunchy air stewardess. You know the kinds of costumes. You know the really cheap ones that you get at the costume shops. She even dressed one time as a raunchy zombie, which I was like, okay, that's interesting choice. Whatever floats your boat. And Louise would send out these photos and Louise would offer up her services in exchange for being paid or, quote, funded her shopping. And it just kept escalating. Louise started sending out topless photos, completely nude photos, all to get money and attention. And it was also at this point where Louise started to claim that she was a model. She would go around telling her friends and family that she was a model, that she was in high demand for all of these various photo shoots. And this is also when Louise started to sign up for a lot of different model agencies. And according to what I have read, Louise was trying to take her career further and further. And this is also when she signed up to a UK-based model agency called Porton. And from what I have read online, this is a bit dodgy. Now, I might be wrong because I don't know much about this, only what I have read online. So please, if anyone has actually used the modeling agency Porton for like legitimate modeling jobs, let me know in the comments because I might be wrong. But from what I read, it is very, very, very dodgy. I think it is a legitimate modeling agency. However, it is used for illegitimate things, if you know what I mean. From what I read, it seems like there is a bunch of creeps that pretend to be a photographer, go to the modeling agency Porton to employ a model, and they pay for a woman to pose nude or topless, whatever, and it's just a creep trying to get their fix. They're not actually a photographer, it's not legitimate, it's nothing like that. And obviously that can be very, very dangerous, but Louise did not care. This was right up her alley. She didn't care what the photographer's intentions were. As long as they were giving her money, she was willing to do whatever they wanted. She created a profile on Porton and her modeling name was Lollipop. And on her profile, it said that she specialized in erotic and cosplay glamour model work. And also on her profile, it said, quote, "I'm open to all types of photo shoots, so just ask me and you never know. I've modeled for about 2 years. I'm an easy person to get along with and reliable. If you want to see pictures from my photo shoots that aren't on my profile, please ask." And then on top of this, she would hound all of these photographers with a load of messages trying to entice them in, saying that she would, quote, "provide extra benefits and sex acts for more money. She also told another photographer that if he paid her £300, he could do whatever he wanted with her. And then finally to another photographer, she said, quote, "If you put in money, I will do pictures. But if you put in even more money, I will meet up and fuck you." This is incredibly dangerous because God knows who she's actually meeting. But Louise just doesn't care. She was just trying to offer up sex for money in the most legal way that she could possibly find. So Louise was doing her modeling work for quite a while, but then something else would happen at pretty much the same time that is also very significant to today's case. And that is that Louise would also become a mother. In late 2014, when Louise is only 18 years old, this is when she gave birth to her first daughter, a little girl that she named Lexi. And were things smooth sailing? Did Louise decide to settle down, actually become a mother? No, of course not, because this is Louise that we are talking about here. First of all, she carried on her modeling work, which is just sleeping with random men, God knows what their actual intentions are, not caring about her own safety and then by extension her daughter's safety. But she also got into a lot of relationship drama with the father of her daughter, who was a man called Chris Draper, and they were never really in a committed relationship. It was more like a on and off again relationship. I mean, what do you expect with someone like Louise? And pretty much from the moment that Lexi was born, Louise made it pretty much impossible for her dad to see her. She did her very best to cut the dad off. And also around this time, Louise had an absolutely massive falling out with pretty much her whole family because she was on Facebook bragging about how much money she could get for having sex. She would post a lot of things about her sex life, how many people she was sleeping with, and her family were very concerned about her daughter. Louise's family would tell her that she needs to stop all of this behavior. She needs to prioritize her daughter, actually be a mom. But Louise would get so angry and infuriated that her family were meddling in her business. But then the final straw for Louise's family was that Louise's nan suddenly passed away. And this is the nan that was always really good to Louise, tried to step into that motherly role when her mother disappeared. Also the nan that Louise would steal from. So her nan got seriously ill very quickly. And the family got in touch with Louise and told her that her nan only had a few days left to live. So Louise should go and see her nan and say her goodbyes, spend some time with her before she does pass. But Louise just said, no, sorry, can't be bothered. I'm too busy. And I'm just like, what? Her nan was so good to her. And she is literally lying on her deathbed. Only a few days left to live. And Louise can't even be bothered to go and visit her once. So then a few days later, her nan did pass away. And then when it came to the funeral, Louise never went to that either. She also said that she was too busy to go to the funeral. And this is when Louise's family had just had enough. This was the last straw. They couldn't believe that Louise couldn't even pay her respects at the funeral. And most of Louise's family cut her off after this. Completely cut ties, didn't want any more contact with her. So all of this family drama was going on, and a couple of years passed. Louise is now 20 years old. And guess what happens now? She decides to have another child. She gave birth to another daughter who she called Scarlett, and the dad was the same dad as Lexi. They are still in this on again, off again relationship. And I'm just like, why? Like the both of them. I'm blaming both of them here. Why are you bringing more children into this world when you clearly don't even want the first one? It's like, wrap it up. And as soon as Scarlett was born, Louise did the exact same thing again. She tried to cut the dad off. She told Chris that he couldn't see his daughters, that she didn't want him to have any contact with them. She even tried to convince Chris that Scarlett, the baby that has just been born, was not even his. She even gave Scarlett a different last name, and she just cut Chris off altogether. And she does this because she moves location. She moves to a different town and she moves away so Chris cannot see his children. Louise Louise and the two children, Lexi and Scarlett, move about an hour away to the town of Rugby, which is also in the West Midlands. And Louise only moves to Rugby so she can get away from the father of her children and also the rest of her family, because she doesn't want their involvement at all. She was sick of their judgment. She just wanted to do her own thing. And if I'm being completely honest, I don't understand this, because I don't know if I've made it clear, but Louise is not very motherly. She doesn't want children. She doesn't care about her own children. So why doesn't she let the dad look after the children? Like, he actually does want to look after the children, so why doesn't she let him? Why doesn't she let her extended family look after the children? Because they also would look after the children for her. Why does she insist on keeping them? I just don't know. And now that Louise has moved away from everyone, she's pretty much cut off everyone from her family. She still has a little bit of contact with her sister, but overall she's cut off everyone. There is no longer any prying eyes, and sadly this is when Louise becomes an even worse parent. And why was her parenting so terrible? Well, that is because she prioritized her sex life before her children. And I truly cannot believe that I am saying those words. Every day, Louise would think about sex, having sex with random men. It was all that she thought about. She didn't care about her children. And she would spend hours every single day on dating apps, websites, trying to find new clients. And one of her favorite dating apps that she would use was called Meet Me. And it's a pretty popular dating app. I think it has approximately like 50 million downloads from the Google App Store. But when I was looking into this app, I was looking at Trustpilot reviews. It had a pretty bad rating, and that is because people have said that half the people on Meet Me were creeps and possibly predators, and then the other half were people just looking for casual sex. There's nobody on that app that actually does want a serious relationship. So you can understand why this app in particular was Louise's favorite, because that is what she's looking for. She's looking for casual hookups. She's looking to make money from these. And Louise would spend hours and hours on this dating app every single day trying to look for casual sex and to make money from that casual sex. And every single night she would go out and have sex with random strangers for money. And I know what you're probably thinking. Well, what is going on with her children? Like, she has two young children. She has a toddler and a newborn. Who is looking after them? Well, she would dump them on any remaining family member that she was still talking to. Most of the time it was her sister Karen, but Louise would dump her children on any friends that she had made in the area, neighbors. She even dumped her children regularly on her landlord. And it's like, what the hell? Who dumps their children? Like, just drops them off at their landlord's place? Thankfully, the landlord was actually a nice woman and she looked after the children pretty well. And worst of all, if no one could look after her children, Louise would just leave her children at home alone. And I just want to remind you all that Lexi is approximately 2 years old and Scarlett is literally a newborn baby. And they just left at home on their own all night. And everyone was so concerned about these children because everyone knew what Louise was doing. And as the months go by, Louise is still doing the same thing, going out pretty much every single night to have casual sex, leaving her children either on their own or with anyone that she can. But as time goes on, Lexi and Scarlett are becoming more and more of a burden to her. She's getting more fed up with being a mom. She can't stand that she has children. And sadly, this is now where Louise starts to physically and verbally abuse her children. Louise would apparently get so angry if one of her children would cry. Louise, do you not realize that newborn babies, they cry? Children cry. She would fly into a rage if they didn't do as they were told. Whenever the children would cry, Louise would say things like, "Shut up," or "I'll give you something to cry about." She would constantly be swearing at them, being very threatening and aggressive. And again, I want to point out that Lexi, 2.5 years old, and Scarlett is a newborn baby. Why is anyone being threatening and aggressive to children anyway, but children that young? She would be physically abusive as well. If her children were acting up, crying, throwing a tantrum, she would literally grab them by their arm and drag them across the floor. Again, I want to remind you of their ages. She is dragging a newborn baby across the floor. She would hit and smack her children at the smallest things. She basically took any anger that she had out on those children. And family members, other people saw what she was doing, heard about what she was doing, and they did report her to social services. But guess what? As what happens so often in these cases, no one from social services even bothered to go out and investigate. So nothing was ever done. And things go on like this for approximately another year. Louise continues abandoning her children to have sex with random men, but she also starts to bring these random men back to her home, putting her children in such dangerous situations. And she lived in a very small flat. It was literally a 1-bedroom flat. And she would have sex with these random men in front of her children. She just didn't care. And seemingly, most of the men that she brought back also didn't care, which is also very concerning. Some of the men would say, "Is it okay if we have sex in front of your children?" And Louise would just say, "Yeah, of course it is. As long as we're quiet, it's fine." And then they would have sex. And I'm like, no. Just because you ask, "Oh, is it okay if we have sex in front of the children?" Like, who even asks that? Of course it's bloody not. It's like, why did none of these men actually say, "Oh, you know what? No, I'm not going to have sex with you when there's children around. That is damaging and abusive." But no, these men that she was bringing back are clearly creeps, so they would just have sex with her in front of their children. On other times, random men would pull up in their cars and vans outside of where she lives, and she would abandon her children in her flat, leave them on their own whilst she went and had sex with them in their car or van outside. On other occasions, Louise would actually go out with strange men all night. And again, some of these men would say, "Is it okay if you leave your children at home alone?" And Louise would say, quote, "Well, they sleep until 7 a.m. and I'll lock the front door behind me, so what is there even to worry about?" Louise has no idea the kind of people she's inviting back to her home. This is not okay. Categorically not okay. Any one of these men that she's inviting back could be a predator. And to make matters worse, some of the men that she was talking to were quite clearly pedophiles. Because one time she was speaking to a man and he was calling her children, quote, "sexy babies." No, anyone that calls any children sexy, no, pedophile. Red flag. But this didn't seem to make Louise worry, and I can't tell you if anything happened to those children when all of these men were going in and out of the home. It is quite possible, but we just don't know that. That is just me speculating. But with the amount of men that Louise was inviting back to her home and the kind of men that she was talking to, calling her children sexy babies, I think it's highly likely that something possibly could have happened. But it's just horrible to think about what those children were being exposed to on a daily basis, the neglect that they are facing by being left alone, and Louise's family were so concerned. Karen, Louise's sister, would text Louise saying that she can't leave her children on their own. Like, that is not okay. And Louise would reply with things like, "Oh, it was only once. It was okay. No harm was done." And one time she was confronted with the fact that she keeps leaving her children, and she jokingly said, quote, "Going to give them both sleeping tablets to knock them out." And I'm just like, oh my God. And she jokingly said it, but unfortunately, as you will come to learn, I don't think she was joking. Again, this is something else that we don't have evidence of, but I wouldn't be surprised if she actually did drug her children so they would be knocked out, unconscious, so she could go out and do whatever she wanted. The longer this case goes on, the more clear it becomes that her children were becoming more and more of a burden on her. They were getting in the way of her life, especially her sex life. She would tell all of her clients how much of a pain her children were and how she could never work with her children around. And this is when an awful plan would start to form in her mind. And we now get to the tragic events of today's case. So in the beginning of 2018, Louise is only 21 years old. I don't really feel like I've highlighted that much in this case, but Louise is so young. And just after the new year, Louise was still doing her regular thing, spending all hours of the day on dating apps and sites, arranging to meet clients. And it was on the 2nd of January where things in this case take a very tragic turn. Out of nowhere, Louise sends a text message to her sister, and Louise is very worried about her 3-year-old daughter, Lexi, because Lexi was having a fit. Now, was Lexi actually having a fit? We don't know, but it is definitely suspicious because Lexi was completely healthy. And then out of nowhere, 3-year-old Lexi is suddenly having a fit. So Louise has messaged her sister, and her sister is saying, call an ambulance, call the emergency services, stop waiting around and do something. But Louise kept refusing. She kept putting it off, saying things like, oh, I'm sure it'll pass, I'm sure everything will be okay. However, finally, after a while, basically after being coerced by her sister, Louise did call the non-emergency helpline in the UK, which is the number 111. So if you are outside of the UK, when you have a medical problem, but it is not an emergency, you call 111. And then when it is an emergency, you call 999. So Louise phones 111, and Louise reported that they were just watching TV one evening, and her daughter, 3-year-old Lexi, suddenly stops breathing. And she stopped breathing for a few minutes. Now, the responder was very concerned. They were probably very confused as well, because if a child stops breathing, I think that is the definition of an emergency. So you would call 999. So the operator on the 111 call arranges for an ambulance to be sent out straight away. But Louise refuses the ambulance. She's like, oh, no, don't bother sending an ambulance out. I'm just going to get a lift from my dad, who I think will be available to take me to the hospital in a few hours. So don't bother with the ambulance. I'll make my own way there. Why is she refusing an ambulance? If your child has stopped breathing and you have the option of an ambulance straight away, or wait a few hours for somebody else to take you to the hospital, you're going to choose the ambulance. But Louise refuses the ambulance. So eventually Louise gets to the hospital. Don't know who actually took her. Lexi went in to get examined. But was Louise concerned? No. Whilst her daughter was in the hospital getting checked over, Louise spent all of her time on dating apps, messaging men, sending new photos of herself. She even messaged one man asking if he wanted sex and that she would take cash up front. And it's like, your daughter is in the hospital. Should you not be more concerned with your daughter? But it turns out that thankfully Lexi was fine. The doctors couldn't find anything wrong with her. And at 6 a.m. the next morning, Lexi was discharged from the hospital. So that should be the end of that. But unfortunately, it wasn't. Because Louise goes back home. She's messaging men on dating apps, of course. But then she starts to Google a lot of things about children's health, which is not uncommon. Like, if your child has been to the hospital, it's probably very normal to Google things about their condition, what it could possibly be. So she starts Googling things about seizures, what causes children to have seizures. But believe me, it becomes very clear that these Google searches had a more sinister meaning. Because later on, that very same day, Lexi has just been discharged from the hospital. There is nothing wrong with her. Doctors said she was very healthy. But guess what happens? Lexi falls seriously ill again. In the early hours of January the 4th, Louise does place a call to 999, claiming again that her daughter Lexi has stopped breathing. She told the 999 operator that Lexi was lying on her back and vomit was coming out of her mouth. But on the call, Louise didn't seem very concerned. She was very cold, very emotionless. And moments later, paramedics arrive and Louise lets them into the home, and again, she's just very cold. Paramedics rush over to Lexi's body and they find her in a terrible condition. Her lips, her fingers, all around her eyes, her ears, it was all turning blue. Lexi was also extremely floppy and she was struggling to breathe. She was literally on death's door. And paramedics also discover that Lexi has been in this condition for a very long time. They could tell with how much she had turned blue with just her condition, the way she looked, that she must have been in this condition for a lot longer than Louise was claiming. That it had taken Louise ages to even bother calling 999. But not just that, paramedics were also starting to become suspicious, because what had caused this? A healthy child doesn't just all of a sudden, out of the blue, stop breathing twice in the matter of days. And just as Lexi was literally on the verge of losing her life, paramedics managed to save her. And Lexi was rushed into hospital. Now, when they were in the ambulance on the way to the hospital, Louise again was unbothered. She actually spent the whole time in the ambulance sending nude photos to other men. When Lexi was in hospital, she was treated and made stable. But doctors again could not explain what had happened? The only conclusion that they could come up with was a possible chest infection. So they decided to keep Lexi in hospital for the next 4 days just to monitor her. And what did Louise do over those 4 days? She actually stayed at the hospital, which I was shocked about. But she just spent the whole time messaging men. She actually would regularly go to the toilets in the hospital, go into the bathroom stall, and take nude topless photos of herself and send them to men. And I'm like, who does that? Who does that in a hospital toilet? She was even flirting and chatting up every single man that she was coming across in the hospital. She was even offering up her services in the hospital. And again, I'm just like, who does that in hospital? She actually gave her number to one of the hospital security guards, who she then exchanged 87 messages with before they later arranged to meet for sex. And I'm just gobsmacked. I'm literally like, what the actual hell? So then a few days later, doctors finally release Lexi. She is perfectly healthy. They discharge her with some antibiotics to treat the suspected chest infection, and everything should be fine. Everything goes back to normal. Louise is still obviously texting men left, right, and centre. However, she now uses her daughter's condition to try and get more money out of men because she needs more money to help care for her daughter, which is a bloody joke. But not just that. Over the next few days, Louise makes more very concerning Google searches. She searches for, quote, "Man commits suicide by supergluing mouth shut." And I'm like, why are you Googling that? But she also searches for, quote, "Can you actually die if you have a blocked nose and your mouth is forcibly closed with tape?" Yet she actually searched for that. It is sadly becoming very clear that Louise is trying to research on how she can kill her daughter but make it look like an accident. And if you hadn't already figured out, that is what she had tried to do the previous 2 hospital visits with Lexi. She has already tried to take Lexi's life 2 times already. Over the next week or so, she makes more very disturbing Google searches. She searches for, quote, "Is it true you shit yourself when you die? For how long after drowning can someone be resuscitated? How long does it take a dead body to go cold up to the shoulder? 5 weird things that happen after you die." Again, more evidence that she is trying to kill her daughter, but make it look like an accident. And she's also trying to research with how long does it take a person to die? How long can a person be resuscitated after drowning, etc. Because she wants to make sure that she really does kill her daughter. Because she has already tried to kill her daughter twice. But her daughter on both of those occasions has been saved. She's failing at killing her daughter. So she's trying to research with when she should dial 999. How long after she murders her daughter can she call the emergency services to make it look like an accident, but also enough time after where she can't be resuscitated? Does that make sense? It is so sick. This woman is so cold. And what is just even more disgusting is that after making these Google searches, Louise would still message men about her daughter's condition. And she would say things like, "I'm just having a really tough time with my 3-year-old being ill from that deadly flu. Doctors keep telling me she's gonna die." Louise is going around telling clients that her daughter is going to die when no one has said that. But we now get to January the 14th. And this is sadly when the worst happens. Because earlier on in that day, Louise took both of her children, Lexi and Scarlett, to visit her sister Karen. And it is said that they all had a very nice time. Lexi had a really nice time and she was perfectly healthy. And then at 6 p.m, Louise, Lexi and Scarlett returned to their home. You can see them actually on CCTV. And you can see on the CCTV footage that Lexi, the 3-year-old, is perfectly fine. However, throughout that evening, Louise would continue to send messages to random men that her daughter was really sick. She also makes another very troubling Google search about how many different ways a person can die. And then later on that evening, out of nowhere, Lexi, all of a sudden, her health goes downhill again. And this is where Louise places another 999 call. And she says once again that her daughter is in a terrible condition.
Ambulance service, is the patient breathing?
No.
They're not breathing?
No.
Okay. And who was it we're talking about?
Lexi, she's 3.
She's 3. Bear with
Yeah.
me. Okay, so She's unconscious and she's not breathing. So help has been arranged, okay?
Lexi again has apparently stopped breathing, and the operator says that they are sending an ambulance straight away. When the paramedics arrive, Louise opens the door calmly like she always does. She seems emotionless, cold. Paramedics head straight to Lexi. They try everything that they can to save her life, but it is too late. They find Lexi and she's completely blue. Her skin was mottled. She was cold to the touch. And when paramedics tried to open up her airway, her jaw was stiff and tightly shut. Paramedics checked for every sign of life, but there was none. And this is sadly when 3-year-old Lexi Draper was pronounced dead. And it just breaks my heart. 3-year-old, she's only 3. There was no need for that poor child to lose her life. And it was at the hands of her own mother. But unfortunately, there is still more tragedy to come. So following Lexi's death, an investigation was carried out, and it was found that when paramedics arrived at the scene, rigor mortis had already set in, which meant that it was highly likely that Lexi had been dead for possibly several hours before Louise dialed 999. So then the question is, okay, so why didn't she call 999 sooner? But did the investigation find this suspicious? Unfortunately, no. They put Lexi's death down to a tragic, unfortunate accident, and the investigation was closed. But Lexi didn't die of an accident or natural causes. She was murdered by her mom. And what did Louise do in the few days after her daughter's death? Was she mourning? Was she sad? Was she crying? No, she just carried on life as normal. Carried on trying to set up clients on these dating apps, sending very provocative photos of herself to anyone that she could for money, not caring the slightest that her daughter has just died. In fact, the very next day after Lexi's death, Louise accepted 41 friend requests on her favourite dating app, Meet Me. Literally, she is wasting no time getting back to her life. On top of that, she is also using the death of her daughter to her advantage. All of the men that she was speaking to, she was telling how sad it was that her daughter had died. And she was hoping that these men would feel sorry for her so they would give her more money when they had sex. And this next thing, oh my God, makes me angry. Louise even set up a GoFundMe account to fund Lexi's funeral. And she was sending the link to this GoFundMe to all of the men that she was talking to. And I'm just like, what the hell? She was probably just pocketing that money for herself. And the only small tribute that she made to her daughter was in a Facebook post that simply read, quote, "R.I.P. my sleeping angel. Will never forget you. Mommy loves you. Can't believe you've gone." And I obviously read that in a sarcastic tone because it's all a load of crap. Louise didn't care about her daughter. In the days following her death, she was seen laughing and joking and going out drinking with friends, having a good time. Louise was even seen at the funeral directors laughing and joking. And she spent most of the time on her phone, probably talking to men. And now we need to talk about Louise's other daughter, 17-month-old Scarlett. Because in the days after Lexi's death, you would think that 21-year-old Louise, and I still cannot get over how young she is, you would think that Louise would be very clingy towards her other daughter, very protective, given the fact that she has just lost her eldest daughter. But that was not the case at all. Scarlett was also a burden to her mom. Louise couldn't wait to get away from her daughter because she was also getting in the way of her life and her sex life. So even though she has just lost her oldest daughter, Louise dumps Scarlett with anyone that she can so she can go and have sex with men. I truly cannot get over this case. I really can't. I can't believe half of the words that I have said have left my mouth. Most of the time, Scarlett would be dropped off with Louise's sister, Karen, and Karen was absolutely furious when she found out what her sister was actually doing. I mean, she knew what her sister was like, but she couldn't believe that in the aftermath of Lexi's death, she was still prioritizing her sex life. And when Karen confronted Louise about what she was doing, Louise just went, "Oh, I'm hurting. I've just lost my daughter. This is how I'm coping. Louise is not hurting. Not at all. In fact, now that Lexi is gone, Louise has now turned her attention on getting rid of her other daughter. Louise started saying to family and friends and neighbours, anyone, that she may have to give Scarlett up. That she doesn't think that she can be a good mother to Scarlett anymore, even though she was never a good mother to begin with. And I just get so frustrated with this case because that was the answer. That was always the answer. If you feel like you can't look after your children, give them to someone that can. Whether that is a family member, a trusted friend, or put them into foster care, which is obviously not always the best option, but it would have been a better option than staying with Louise. But this is not what Louise did. We now get to the part where this case takes another tragic turn, because just over 1 week after Lexi has died, Louise sends a message to a man on Badoo saying, quote, she hopes Scarlett doesn't go the same way. And then just after this, Louise's mom, the one that ran off with that other man when she was a child, randomly appears back in her life to help plan Lexi's funeral. And Louise says to her mom, quote, now that Lexi has died, Scarlett will be next. What? Ding, 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 red flag. And Louise's mom said that Louise said that in a threatening way, basically insinuating that Scarlett's going to be murdered next. And I'm literally pulling out my hair here, because if that was the case, why didn't she go to the police? Why didn't Louise's mom go to the police to report her daughter? No one went to the police. No one reported her. No one thought that any of her behaviour was suspicious. And then on the 1st of February, only 18 days after Lexi has lost her life, another tragedy would occur, because on that evening, Louise was staying in a hotel room with her daughter Scarlett because she was just too heartbroken to actually stay in her home when this was not the case. Somebody else was probably paying for this hotel. I don't know who. So on this evening, Louise and Scarlett are in the hotel room. And I just want to remind you that Scarlett is perfectly healthy. However, on this evening, just like what happened to Lexi, Scarlett's health took a sudden, dramatic downward turn. All of a sudden, Louise started messaging the men that she was having sex with if they could give her money, £30 to be exact, for petrol so she could take her daughter Scarlett to the hospital. And these men were replying, no, call an ambulance if it's really that urgent, like you need to act quick. But Louise didn't want an ambulance. She just wanted money. She just wanted attention. And she didn't call an ambulance. And at 9:50 p.m. that evening, Louise decides to make her own way to the hospital. And she can be seen on CCTV exiting the hotel carrying Scarlett. But did Louise rush to the hospital? No, of course not. Because she doesn't want to rush to the hospital. She doesn't want to get to the hospital too soon because she doesn't want to risk the doctors and nurses possibly saving her daughter's life. She wants to make sure that her daughter is dead before she dials 999 or goes to the hospital. So Louise gets in the car and she drives around town for a bit. Scarlett is in the back. We don't know if Scarlett is alive or dead. She's just taking a leisurely drive around. She can be seen again on CCTV stopping for petrol, taking her sweet ass time. She doesn't seem to have a care in the world. She definitely does not seem like a parent whose child has stopped breathing in the backseat. And at 10:20 p.m, 30 whole minutes since Louise left the hotel with Scarlett, she still is not at the hospital. She finally decides to pull into a shopping centre just so she can pull over, and she finally dials 111, which again, to remind you all, is the non-emergency helpline in the UK. Tell me if I'm wrong, but since when is a child who has stopped breathing a non-emergency? Yeah, no, it's not. You dial 999. So when Louise is on the phone to the 111 operator, she tells the operator that her daughter doesn't really seem to be breathing, she's not responding, and what should she do? And the operator obviously says, we need to get your daughter to a hospital ASAP. So an ambulance is sent out to their location, and the operator talks Louise through CPR, which apparently Louise try to perform CPR. And I have no evidence of this, but I don't think she did. She doesn't want her daughter alive, so why would she try to save her life? So when the ambulance finally arrived and the paramedics got there, they rushed straight to Scarlett, started performing CPR, started checking for any signs of life, but there was no response. Scarlett was completely lifeless, and the paramedics were panicking, thinking that they weren't going to be able to save her life. They couldn't figure out what had happened either, because she seemed perfectly healthy, like she looked perfectly healthy. So when they asked Louise what happened, like was there an accident? Did something happen to her? Louise just replied, "Oh, I think she's got the flu." And of course the paramedics didn't believe her. They knew that there must be some other explanation to this perfectly healthy 17-month-old child just stopping breathing. So they rushed Scarlett straight to the hospital, hoping that as soon as she's in the hospital, they will be able to save her. But very sadly, it was too late. There was nothing anyone could do. And now, tragically, 17-month-old Scarlett is also pronounced dead. And I'm just again left with the question of why. Louise even said that she wanted to give up her daughter, so why didn't she? Why did she decide to murder both of her children? And following Scarlett's death, an investigation was launched because it was suspicious. And it was found that when paramedics arrived at the scene and when they found Scarlett's body, they found that her body temperature was very low, her blood sugar was raised, her eyes were fixed and dilated, and this all indicated that Scarlett had been starved of oxygen for a very long time. It was very obvious that Scarlett had suffered a traumatic death, but Louise didn't care. Literally just as her daughter was pronounced dead, Louise was seen chatting to the hospital staff, laughing and joking, and she spent most of her time on her phone, probably talking to men. And we also have to remember that this is less than 3 weeks after her other daughter has died. She has lost 2 daughters in the space of 3 weeks. Any parent would be falling apart, unable to cope, and she has no emotion because this is exactly what she planned. And it seems like the police also were starting to catch on, because obviously the fact that 2 perfectly healthy children have died just 3 weeks apart is suspicious enough for the police to start looking into it. Forensic experts were called in both cases. Both Lexi and Scarlett underwent extensive postmortems. And what did the postmortems find? That both deaths were clearly intentional and not an accident. In the case of Lexi, examiners found that she had died from a deliberate obstruction of her airways. She also had marks on her nose indicating that her nose was held shut. And chillingly, Lexi also had scratch marks on her neck, which indicated that Lexi was trying to fight her mom's hands away from her neck as her mom suffocated her. And to just think of 3-year-old Lexi fighting for her life, scratching at her mom's hands. How can Louise live with herself? How did she not even for a moment think, oh, maybe not murder my daughter, let's stop. And in the case of Scarlett, they also found that she had died from a deliberate obstruction of her airways. She had bruising around her neck, bruising to her head, damage to her neck muscles, bleeding to her lungs, and some of Scarlett's blood was also found on the pillow of their hotel room. All signs point to the fact that Louise suffocated both of her daughters, Lexi and Scarlett. Following this discovery, Louise was obviously immediately arrested, and all she had to say for herself was, quote, "Why would I kill my own kids?" She has never admitted to anything. She has never shown remorse or regret. However, unfortunately, there wasn't enough evidence against her yet to formally arrest Louise at this moment. However, investigators never gave up on this case because they knew that Louise was behind the murders of these 2 innocent children. So nearly a year later, which is just crazy that they needed that long to do an investigation in what seems to me a pretty straightforward case, but nearly a year later, in January of 2019, police finally have enough evidence to finally arrest Louise Porton for the murders of her 2 children. And then in August of 2019, her trial starts because she pleaded not guilty and there was so much evidence against her. All of her chat history on her dating apps between these men was shown in court. The fact that she prioritized her sex life before her children, the fact that she verbally and physically abused her children, the fact that she would just dump her children anywhere. It was very clear that she just did not care about her children at all. But then her Google searches and then obviously the post-mortem results. Louise actually did take the stand in her trial and she tried to defend herself, which she didn't do a very good job, obviously, because she's guilty. And the jury found her guilty. And Louise Porton was sentenced to 32 years in prison, which in my opinion is not enough. Like, if you think about how young she is, 23 years old when she got sentenced. You add 32 years onto that, what do you get? 55, if my maths is correct. And if she behaves well in prison, she might even get out earlier than that. I'm sorry, but I don't think that is long enough. And in the aftermath of this case, every single person connected to this case was devastated, especially Lexi and Scarlett's dad, Chris Draper. Louise's own mom was also very affected by this case, so much so that she actually took her own life. And this is just such a sad and devastating case. And why did Louise do this? Well, no one actually knows. There's obviously speculations, I've obviously speculated, but no one knows. There is no clear motive, nothing came up in trial. She did undergo a mental health assessment and nothing was diagnosed. It was found that she was completely competent, sane of mind at the time of the murders. And the only really theory that has been put forward is that Louise just didn't care about her children and her children were so much of a burden on her life, especially her sex life, that she just wanted them gone. Get rid of them. So she murdered them. And I want to end this video today remembering the victims of today's case. Lexi Draper and Scarlett Vaughn were described as two sweet little girls who had amazing big smiles and big personalities. After their passing, a white horse-drawn carriage draped with purple was arranged to take them to their final resting place. They had their whole lives ahead of them, and they were taken far, far too soon. Lexi was only 3 years old and Scarlett was only 17 months old. And that brings us to the end of today's tragic case. As always, let me know your thoughts, theories and opinions because we don't really have many answers to today's case. So let me know what you think. And don't forget to leave me your case suggestions in the comments down below because I always want to know what you want to hear next. Thank you again to Missed Play for sponsoring today's video and I'll see you all in my next one. Bye.